Hello, my name is Melissa Reskoff. You may know me from Conversations with Melissa. I'm also on the planning committee for the International ADHD Conference and a former co-chair. Today, I'm speaking with Cynthia Hammer, founder of the Inattentive ADHD Coalition and author. So thank you so much, Cynthia, for being here today.
It's always a pleasure, Melissa, to talk with you.
Ain't it the truth?
Actually, this is our third time trying to record this conversation. So if you're seeing it, you're lucky.
I am curious to hear about the Inattentive ADHD Coalition. What's happening with your mission? How has that evolved?
It's in the process of evolving. We got a really outstanding new member to our board, and he volunteered to be president. And he's having us read this book called Traction, where it says how a company, if you have a really small focus, you're going to be more effective. It's not that different from what we had before because we always believed children should be diagnosed by the age of 8. But now we're changing that to say all children should be screened before they finish the second grade. The reason we're saying that is because we've learned it's the most common childhood neurobiological disorder and how severe the damage is if children aren't diagnosed. We're talking to adults who didn't get diagnosed, who end up with depression, with anxiety, with low self-confidence. We know that early diagnosis is key. Everyone says that, but we're not focused on how we get early diagnosis to happen. We think it's going to happen if the American Academy of Pediatrician says this is your guideline. You will screen all the children in your practice before they reach the second grade for ADHD. And that's how we're going to find these children who haven't been found in the past. We also want to work on how we talk to children. Once they have the diagnosis, how are we going to talk to them so they feel empowered and use this awesome brain they have to be successful in life?
It's really interesting how you say honing in and focusing the mission towards this. All of the children need to get vaccinated. There's a lot of protocols and requirements for being in school, and this idea of bringing it to the physicians seems like a winner. All children go to the doctors.
What we thought earlier is we would work with schools to get children identified, not diagnosed, but just say this child should go for an evaluation. But then we were told the school systems don't really want to identify children because the more children they identify, the more expensive it becomes for them to provide the accommodations. So the schools have a vested interest not to identify children. I'm not saying that's true of all schools, but that's more or less what we're hearing. So we thought doctors will care. Yet the other day I talked with someone who's worked a lot with doctors, not that he's a physician himself, but he's saying doctors also have a bias not to want to because they don't feel ready to manage it. If they've screened the children and the children have ADHD, they didn't have adequate training. They aren't ready to deal with the children they've screened. And of course, it takes more time. There's going to be a big shift in the whole system of neurodivergence, recognizing it, honoring it, being skillful in helping these children and adults to thrive. It reminds me of the earlier ones because I have a nephew who's Down syndromes and how the parents of the Down syndromes secured things for their children. The same with the disabilities rights. I think neurodivergence is a new group. We could band together to get what we need for ourselves too.
I like the heading of neuro. I live in Los Angeles, and there is a very active, politically active parent who is very able to get attention towards childhood autism. It takes all the oxygen out of the room for the other.
Well, I just got an email that Stanford is offering a course, 2-day course. It's free, but when I look at it, even though they advertise it's on neurodiversity, which is the wrong term, it should be neurodivergence, it seems like most of the presentations are on autism. Now, when you have autism, it could be more severe. than having ADHD. Both of these conditions are spectrum conditions. So you can't say across the board that people with autism have more challenges in life. But I think autism has become so vocal. They're the ones that people think of when they think of neurodiversity. And what we're hearing from women like myself that have the inattentive type, that yes, we have some autistic characteristics as well. I'm hoping to be able to collaborate or align with some of the autism, saying, look, we've got some shared interests here. You have people that overlap with our people. Let's not stay separate. Let's work together.
That's what was powerful about the disability rights movement, is that the people who had mobility, the deaf community, when they all came together, they had more ability to make changes and have accommodations.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, Melissa, though, the other day I read one person's blog post saying ADDers need to stop hating on ADHDers. He's talking like there's this schism in the community, which you feel sometimes. If you say, I think it's a disability, people are after you saying, no, it's a superpower. And people that say it's a superpower, there are people that are after, or if you take medicine, there's people you criticizing. If you don't take medicine, there's people after you for not taking. I'm just saying to even get us to be aligned and say, we have a lot of variety. We have a lot of beliefs that differ, but we have something in common, which we want ADHD to be recognized and treated.
I think the thing with the Stanford is that they have a lot of students who are on the autism spectrum, and that conference is geared towards employment and employers.
But what I've read, Melissa, is 1 out of 50 children might have autism. Maybe it's increasing as we learn more about autism, but we already know that 1 out of 10 children have ADHD. It's a more common condition than autism. I feel it should be part of the conversation when you're talking about neurodivergence. I'm jealous that autism, they have a character on Sesame Street. Now, where's the ADHD character? He would be really entertaining, or I should say she would be really entertaining.
I agree. I feel like there's room enough for all the variety. There was something you had said about working with the pediatricians. There were some people saying they were having difficulty getting diagnosed, and a pediatrician friend of mine said, maybe consider going to a doctor who treats children and adults for ADHD because they're more tuned in.
In my book, I write about how I got diagnosed. Maybe this is happening with others because they visit whoever's seeing their child for ADHD and they slowly recognize themselves. It seems to say we need to educate physicians about ADHD is a huge undertaking, which our organization wouldn't be able to do. I don't know where the pressure for that would come from. There's a committee undertaking to write guidelines for adult ADHD, which is needed and it's a great thing. But this committee, when asked, are you thinking of any special criteria for women? They said no. Some women say they really notice the time of their month, their symptoms get worse after their child was born, postpartum depression, menopause, all these areas worsened their ADHD symptoms. So they feel it should be part of the adult ADHD guidelines. I don't know if masking is more of an issue in the women than it is in the men.
Based off of just interacting with women and men who are diagnosed as adults, I will say you don't really hear masking from men. You mentioned Diva-5. Is there elements about the Diva-5 that there's a reason you're mentioning it? There's a reason it's a tool that you like. What are those things?
I guess I could encourage people to visit their website. It was developed by a woman in the Netherlands. What is posted on her website is that in Korea, I think they validated and found it to be reliable. So it's a screen for adult ADHD, but there's a huge section just on inattentive type of ADHD, and it's been found valid and reliable. It can't diagnose anything else that co-occurs with ADHD, which is often the case, but it can apparently diagnose ADHD. I encourage anyone who's wondering, do I have ADHD? Get this DIVA for 10. It would give you the assurance. So when you seek a diagnosis, you could say, this is valid and reliable. And look at how I answered all these questions.
I really appreciate that you have a screening tool that you like.
In the DSM, it says often. Now, what does often mean? And the DIVA says whatever term they're using means at least 3 times a week. That's what their often is. But the DSM doesn't. Some days you could feel like it's often, and other days you wouldn't feel like it was often. That's an emotional thing, I think, whether you think you're doing something often or not.
When you're talking to people with ADHD, memory issues are there. To think that someone could
be reliable, they're not reliable.
We're only really tuned into the last 2 days. If we didn't trip over our shoelace in the last 2 days, then it's not happening often. But if
yes,
last week we tripped and now I'm sitting in front of this person, but I can't remember that.
Yes.
That sounds integral. Like, what does often mean? 3 times a week. Oh, okay. Yes, that happened every day last week, but only 2 days this week. Yeah.
It's just our general impression of something. That's why they are really strong on saying, bring someone with you to your assessment that knows you. Between wanting to make a good impression and not disclose all your dirty laundry and then having a poor memory, you might do yourself a disservice. You'll end up not getting diagnosed.
Saying so much in just this little observation of yours. But my husband diagnosed first and never brought me to an appointment. There was some fine tuning with his meds that were just, they weren't working for me, let's put it that way, but they were working great from his perception. To go to be included, right? But then you have to acknowledge all the things you said. Hey, there's dirty laundry. Hey, my memory's not what I think it is. I'm in denial about that, and I don't talk about it or notice it. I'd love to circle back around inattentive type. What are some of the things that happen for people with inattentive type?
Okay, so Melissa, I'm not good at remembering the 9 symptoms of inattentive ADHD, so I have written them out. Okay, see which ones you relate to. Often making careless mistakes, often having difficulty following directions, difficulty organizing. You dislike anything requiring mental effort. You're easily distracted from tasks. You're not listening. You lose your possessions. You're forgetful. And you're distracted by stimuli. Those were pretty similar to when I got diagnosed. I would read some of them, and some days I'd say that sounds like me. And other days I'd read them and say, it doesn't sound like me. The DIVA has a lot more questions and describing particular behaviors. It doesn't leave it up to your imagination. What does losing possessions mean? Or what does forgetful mean? They have just lots more than those 9 things I read because, as I said, some days it sounded like me and other days it didn't.
Yeah, I was a latchkey kid and I forgot my keys once or twice. And I made a strategy around pinning the keys either to the purse I carried. I pinned them inside my coat pocket before I carried a pocketbook. I made some strategies, be sitting outside on the porch for 3 hours until people got home. I do have a friend, and she tells me she loses her ATM card at least once a week. That's a hard way to live. Yeah.
I could relate to that. I was always misplacing my credit card. When I learned about my ADHD and wanted to create new habits, that was the first habit. Always putting my credit card back in the same place. It was embarrassing. That's something so simple and so stupid, but it was a major achievement for me. And It was like the first step.
I had to do the same thing to train myself to put the card back in the same place. You are speaking right to me. That is an important thing.
I wanted to go back to your learning to safety pin your keys in your coat because you learned an accommodation for yourself. And what Dr. Orrin Mason said, children in school, they get the accommodations and they do better. And then the school says they're doing fine. We don't need the accommodations anymore. Wrong. The accommodations made them better. You need to keep the accommodations there. You don't give someone glasses and say, now you see better, let's take the glasses away.
Exactly. I worked for visually impaired, partially sighted, and totally blind people. I find it very helpful to go back and look at this other model. The glasses are a great example. Yes, they have an accommodation where the computers reads to them, right? That dragon says. Now you're going to say they're doing their work. We're going to take that away.
It enables them to function at their best level. Yes. I wanted to go back to when you talked about people going for the diagnosis. Tied into that is self-awareness, that people with ADHD often lack self-awareness. If medicine's working the best, you can't even tell you're taking it. You don't feel different. You are different, but you don't feel different. Dr. Hallowell gives this example of this husband and wife going back to talk with him, and he'd been on the medicine, and that he says, I don't think it's working, it's not making a difference. The wife turns to her husband and says, honey, if you stop taking the medicine, I'm going to divorce you. I mean, maybe it's not a true story, but it gets the point across that the medicine can make a huge difference, and we sometimes don't even know it.
That is one of the most true things there is. I have a friend, his family can tell whether he took his meds. He can't tell. He doesn't notice a difference. He doesn't know what they see or don't see when he's taken it, but everybody's very aware when he did or did not. That's an important element, right? The impairment impacts this human and all the structures they live in, their family, their workplace, their community. So you have to listen to what are the other people who are close to you saying.
I think that would be a positive reinforcer for taking your medicine because your relationships with your people around you have improved. My son was the first one to get diagnosed. On a day he didn't take his medicine, we argued. I couldn't tell what was different, but I knew on those days we were more at loggerheads with each other than we would be on the days when he had taken his medicine.
I was out to dinner with some folks from my local chat. Those parents had to have one of those meetings with their 18-year-old. You need to be taking this medicine.
If you want to live at home, you have to.
Yes, it was exactly that. You talk about doing interviews of adult women with combined type. What did you learn from interviewing these women?
I just solicited combined type women to interview. I knew what inattentive women were like. I'm one, and Terry Matlin is one. You're one. We come across a certain way. We're low key. That's how I think of it. I wanted to see, because they, again, lump all girls and women as though we're all the same and say most of us have inattentive type. It's not true. What surprised me is the combined type didn't get diagnosed either. They might have been more physically hyperactive, but they restrained it. They said, I learned to wiggle my foot or get up out of my seat and sharpen a pencil. One woman said, I bit the inside of my cheek to remind myself to stay still. They were having more physical symptoms, but they suppressed it, which I guess is a form of masking. They got cultural messages that if you're a good little girl, you sit there quietly. It was hard for them to sit there quietly. The other thing I learned, I was just surprised that they hadn't gotten diagnosed when they were younger. So that's one reason we're now trying to focus on all children, because there's not just the inattentive type that have been missed. I think the people with inattentive type, we can have energy, but it's short-lived. We burn out more quickly. And the hyperactive types have 24-hour-a-day energy. Talking with some of these women, I could have asked one question and they could have talked for the full hour. The only way I got to ask another question was to raise my hand and say, hey, I've got something else I want to ask you. They weren't all that way, but they tend to be more extroverts. And the inattentive types, we tend to be more in those two things. How much they talk, the ideas they have. You and I talking now, we have ideas going back and forth. They generate ideas all on their own. One thing after another. As I said, they could have filled a whole hour from one question. It would have provoked. Does anyone come up to mind for you that embodies the hyperactive type? Because I think most women are more the inattentive type. And as we get older, more of us become inattentive.
There's a few.
Yeah.
It's like drinking from a fire hose. I do
Yes.
have one woman friend, and it is a little exhausting. Needing to go over an hour, need to lay down after that. It's just so much, even though I can keep up and the cultural reference, but it's mental gymnastics and it's a little tiring after a while, but exhilarating, simultaneously exhilarating.
I want to get your opinion on this because some of these combined type women recalled being bullied. I don't think the inattentive types would be bullied as much because the hyperactive types would be more pushy, but they're out there. They want to be involved. They want to engage. They might interrupt people where the inattentive type is holding back. They don't make waves. They wouldn't be the target of bullying as much.
I agree with your theory. It makes the combined type, yes, sometimes you're full of beans and bossy and out there and interrupting and riding the energy wave. I could see how they're bullying, and the inattentive where you're managing your ability to sit still and be quiet. Your mind's wandering, you're looking out the window, but it's not interrupting people such that it would bring some verve from other people. I agree with your supposition for sure. Did you notice any correlation with the scales or the issues that they complained about or were most prominent when they were diagnosed and since treatment?
When I asked Dr. Ferrone which was worse, inattentive ADHD or combined type, he said combined type because they have more symptoms. Almost all these women related to all 18 symptoms of ADHD. Right? The inattentive might have all 9 or some of the in a few of the hyperactive, but we still think of ourselves as inattentive. So we don't have as many symptoms. That's not talking about the severity of the symptoms. I still think one could be as harmful as the other, but as a general picture, you have to say that the combined type have more of the ADHD symptoms. What surprised me in interviewing them is some of them, to me, hadn't found the best medicine yet. They might be taking Wellbutrin or some of the medicines that we wouldn't consider the first line treatments for ADHD, but they were content. So I didn't say anything to them. The other thing that impressed me is when I talked about what symptoms they had before diagnosis, it was all 18. I asked them after diagnosis, it still was almost all 18. But they'd say, that one's a little less. That one's improved somewhat. But it's not, except for 1 or 2, that those symptoms had totally disappeared. The biggest thing that happened was learning they had ADHD. They accepted themselves. That was the biggest difference for them. They started not feeling the shame. They said, this is how my brain is. I'm doing the best I can. They were moving forward that way. So that's the other reason to learn early. about yourselves, because not knowing about yourselves contributes to your problems. You feel you're different. All your life, you feel you're different, and not knowing why is the hardship.
I also hear this acceptance and less negative self-talk. Maybe there's some improvement. Still vexed by certain things, but this acceptance, the knowing it's not a mystery anymore, and shaking off the shame, shaking off some of the negative self-talk, or coming to more acceptance. That's how you put it.
That's what I would advise is the first step to take, besides putting your credit card away, is learning to stop your negative self-talk. You have to become aware of it and then stop it. In my book, I write about this man in the support group. He announced, "I work for the worst boss imaginable. He's always criticizing me." And then he said, "I'm self-employed." There's this method for thought stopping. One is you have something on your desk. When you're engaging in your negative talk, you pick it up and you really look at it. You get your thoughts engaged in something else. Another way is you put a rubber band on your wrist, and every time you're thinking a negative thought, you snap the rubber band, and that breaks up your thoughts. I told him to do this. Every week I said, "How's it going?" He says, what do you think he says?
Says my arm's black and blue.
He said, "I have a very sore wrist." But you do improve. For me, it's stop the negative self-talk, have a period where there's nothing, and then there's the period where you only have the positive self-talk.
I have never heard the strategy you mentioned of an object that you can gather thoughts, a disruptor of the negative. Wow, I'm impressed with that. That's very interesting.
I'm sure there are different techniques, but you have to be aware first, then you break it up. And you keep doing that. It's just a new habit.
This is the thing. When the memory's not good, right? So this is what's great about the support groups. We forget we did something. This person is developing a whole series of events, and then she stops. And I say, "Don't you remember you've made editorial calendars before?" And she had completely forgotten that she'd done this. We need the other people just to remind us.
We do need people to remind us of things we've done that have been good. Our memories are so bad.
But the thing is we can feel such guilt and remorse. We forgot that anniversary party that we were planning to go to, and we bought the present and we forgot all about it. It starts to have all this emotional gravity. If we could just give ourselves a break. Hey, that's the thing. You forget things, even important things.
Let me tell you what some people think is the plus part of forgetting. When we forget how we did it the last time, we have to think of a new way to do it. That helps our creativity. Sometimes when we forget how we did it before, we might think of a better way to do it.
There's definitely some mental reward for problem solving for ADDers.
We feel bright. I think all ADA people are problem solvers. It's part of our nature. Sometimes we almost have to cover our mouth because people don't want to hear how to solve a problem. They're happy doing it the way they're doing it.
It's the truth. Yeah, when I was a kid, my grandparents taught me kaluki, where you put 50 points worth of cards down, and then after that you could rearrange the cards to get rid of what's in your hand still. And my grandparents would just be like, "Slow down, kid."
Well, you had a different way you wanted to play?
I knew that I had to meld, right? You had to put the stuff down on the table. But after that, I really could be picking up cards and moving them around up in my hand. And
your creativity was coming to play.
I still love cards. I still love ordering the cards.
I got introduced to a video game that's supposed to help create attention. And I think it's helped me. But the problem is you already have to have the ability to do something every day. The thing you're trying to improve, you have to have some of it to start with. I used to have a behavior modification for my children, and if I woke up one day and didn't remember it, I'd forget it from that day forward. Forget I was doing it. This program I try to do it every day because I know if there's a day I don't do it, I might forget from then on.
I have a friend who's been a friend for 20 years, but she's newly diagnosed, and she was telling me about the game as well. I see they're reaching their audience.
This is,
Lovely talking to you today. This
yes,
was an excellent conversation.
I hope people find it interesting. I never got to mention my book, so let me just throw that out there. I wrote a book called Living with Inattentive ADHD. It's a memoir about my life, but it's also a self-help book. I'm hoping people with ADD read it and feel understood and feel hopeful. It's a book you could give to family members, and it will help them understand the breadth and the depth of ADHD challenges. I'm close to 80 and I had nothing to lose. Who cares? If you want to criticize me, criticize what I said, but put it all out there, all the mistakes that I've made in life because of my undiagnosed ADHD, and then my path to a more fulfilling life.
People need to hear what it is like to live with the
Mm-hmm.
AD. What an accomplishment
Mm-hmm.
to finish the book. I have seen a lot of very big names in the ADHD universe endorsing your book. I wish you good success.
Hi. Thank you, Melissa. It was fun talking to you.